a poor waitress, a homeless-looking old woman, a $12 billion company. What happens next changed everything. Stay till the end? The twist is insane. If Sarah Mitchell had chosen to stay silent that day, like everyone else in the diner, the $12 billion Halloway fortune might have ended up in the hands of someone who never deserved it. But she didn't stay silent, and that one decision, to stand up for a strange old woman in worn-out clothes on a rainy November afternoon, pulled her into a family secret so deep that not even the local police ever found out about it. This is a story told through the eyes of the people who lived it. Stay until the very end, because the biggest twist doesn't come until the final stretch. Millbrook, Ohio, was the kind of town where everybody knew everybody, and news traveled faster than the local Wi-Fi. Population just under 9,000, about 2 hours outside Cleveland. Sarah Mitchell, 28 years old, worked as a waitress at the Copper Cup, the only coffee shop in town that pulled in travelers off the interstate. She was a single mother. Her son, Ethan, was 7, and he had a heart condition that required regular monitoring. Insurance never covered enough, and every month Sarah had to count every dollar of tips just to keep up with the medical bills. 10-hour shifts, 6 days a week, under a manager named Karen Whitfield, who judged every customer by how they looked. "Remember, Sarah?" Karen liked to say. "Anyone who looks like they can't afford more than a coffee, you steer them out politely. This is a business, not a shelter." Sarah never agreed with that, but she needed the job. That Friday afternoon, it was pouring rain, 4:30 on the clock. The bell over the door jingled, and an elderly woman stepped inside. She looked to be around 70, silver hair soaked through, wearing a worn-out raincoat with one shoulder seam coming apart, her shoes caked in mud. She stood by the entrance, eyes scanning the room, clearly unsure of herself. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice shaking. "Could I get a cup of coffee?" Karen glanced over from the register and muttered to another employee, "Great. Probably homeless, just ducking out of the rain." Sarah, wiping down table 7, looked up. Something about the old woman's eyes stopped her cold. Not poverty, but a kind of loneliness, so deep it looked like she'd lost her way not just on the street, but in life itself. Sarah set down her rag and started walking over. Karen got there first. "Ma'am," Karen said flatly, "this section is for customers ordering full meals. If you're just looking to get out of the rain, there's a bench at the bus stop 2 blocks down." The old woman lowered her head, her hands clasped tightly together. I can pay. I just need to sit for a minute." "I'm sorry," Karen said, waving over a part-time security guard named Dale. "Would you please show her out?" Dale reached for the old woman's arm. She flinched, stumbling, nearly losing her footing. And that was the moment Sarah Mitchell stepped in. "Stop." Sarah planted herself between Dale and the old woman, her voice low but sharp enough that half the diner turned to look. "Sarah," Karen warned, "this isn't your call." "She hasn't done anything wrong," Sarah said, not breaking eye contact with Karen. "She wants to buy a cup of coffee. That's literally the one thing this place sells, isn't it?" The room went quiet. A few customers pulled out their phones. Not to call anyone, just to record. Karen's jaw tightened. "If you serve her, you're personally responsible for that table's numbers." "Fine." Sarah turned to the old woman, her voice softening completely, like she'd shed all the tension in an instant. "Come with me, ma'am. I've got you." She led her to a small table by the window, the one with the best light, the one Sarah usually claimed for her own lunch breaks. "What can I get you? Hot coffee with milk sounds good on a day like this." The old woman nodded, her eyes still glistening. Whether from the rain or something else, it was hard to tell. "Thank you, dear. My name is Eleanor." "I'm Sarah," she smiled. "Give me just a minute." Sarah made the coffee herself, wouldn't let anyone else touch it. She even brought over a small plate of butter cookies, the ones the diner usually reserved for regulars, off the books. When she set it down, Eleanor grabbed her hand. "Aren't you afraid of losing your job?" Sarah gave a small laugh. "I am, but if I let someone get treated like that right in front of me just because I was scared of losing a paycheck, then I don't deserve that paycheck in the first place." Eleanor went quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah like she was weighing something important. "Do you have a family, Sarah?" "I have a son, Ethan. He's 7. Her voice dropped. "It's just me and him." "Where's his father?" Sarah shook her head, not wanting to go there. Eleanor caught the hint and let it go, just gave her hand another gentle squeeze. That's when Sarah's phone buzzed in her apron pocket. It was Ethan's school. "Excuse me a second," she said, stepping into the hallway. The teacher on the other end sounded frantic. "Ms. Mitchell? Ethan had chest pain at school. We've called an ambulance. They're heading to Millbrook General right now." Sarah's face went white. She bolted out of the diner without a second thought. Forgot her apron? Forgot her shift wasn't over? Forgot Eleanor sitting alone with a coffee that was still warm. But Eleanor saw the whole thing through the window, and for reasons no one in the diner understood, she stood up, left a $20 bill on the table, and quietly walked out into the rain, heading the same direction Sarah's car had gone. Sarah ran into the at Millbrook General, her heart hammering. Ethan was lying in a hospital bed, pale, wires from a heart monitor running across his chest. "Mom," he whispered when he saw her. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." She grabbed his hand, tears streaming down. Dr. Alan Whitmore came out to explain. "Ethan's episode is connected to the congenital heart condition we've been monitoring. He needs to be transferred to a specialized cardiac facility in Columbus for further testing. Surgery is likely..." How much would surgery cost, doctor?" Dr. Whitmore hesitated. "We're looking at roughly $120,000, not including post-op care." The number hit Sarah like a blow to the chest. She didn't make a tenth of that in a whole year. She sank into a plastic chair in the hallway, burying her face in her hands. It's the worst kind of fear a mother can feel. Knowing exactly what would save your child, and knowing you can't afford it. Then, out of nowhere, a familiar voice. "Sarah?" She looked up. It was Eleanor. Still in that same worn raincoat, hair still damp, a folded umbrella in her hand. "You? Why are you here?" "I saw you run out in a panic, so I took a cab and followed. I'm sorry to intrude, but I was worried about you." Sarah broke down, unable to hold it in any longer. She told Eleanor everything. About Ethan, about the massive hospital bill, about 7 years of raising him alone. Eleanor listened without interrupting, gently rubbing Sarah's back. When Sarah finished, Eleanor asked a strange question. "If someone offered to cover this entire cost right now, but in exchange, you had to keep their identity private, no questions asked, would you accept?" Sarah froze, staring at the old woman with a mix of confusion and caution. "What What do you mean by that? Eleanor only smiled, mysterious, without answering directly. Take care of Ethan. I'll be back. And she stood, walked to the end of the hallway, and disappeared behind the elevator doors, leaving Sarah with 100 unanswered questions. What Sarah didn't know was that tucked inside Eleanor's raincoat pocket was a brand new smartphone. Not exactly something a homeless old woman would own, and she had just sent a single text message to a contact saved as R.H. main office. Found the one. Get everything ready. Meet me at Millbrook General in 30 minutes. Exactly 30 minutes later, 3 black Suvies pulled up outside Millbrook General, something that had never happened in this small town before. Hospital security scrambled. Nurses whispered to each other. A man in a tailored black suit, radiating authority, stepped out of the lead vehicle, followed by 4 assistants clutching tablets. This was Richard Halloway, chairman and CEO of Halloway Industries, one of the largest medical technology conglomerates in the country, valued at over $12 billion. His face regularly showed up in Forbes and on CNBC. Richard stormed into the lobby, his voice thick with worry. "Where's my mother? Where's Eleanor Halloway?" A nurse pointed toward the pediatric hallway. Richard rushed over, and when he saw his mother sitting beside Sarah, he exhaled in relief and dropped to one knee beside her. "Mom, I've been looking everywhere since this afternoon. Security said you left the house at dawn. Nobody knew where you'd gone. I was terrified." "I'm fine, Richard." Eleanor patted her son's hand. "I just needed to go find something on my own that no one at the company could ever find for me." Richard turned to Sarah, who stood frozen, completely lost. "Who are you?" he asked, his worried tone softening into something harder to name. Maybe genuine gratitude. Before Sarah could answer, Eleanor spoke up. "This is Sarah. She's the one who stood up for me this afternoon when the whole diner tried to throw me out because they thought I was homeless." Richard stared at Sarah, stunned, something unreadable crossing his face. "You didn't even know who my mother was, and you still helped her?" "I didn't need to know who she was," Sarah said, her voice shaky but firm. "I just knew she needed a cup of coffee and a little bit of respect. That's all." The room went quiet for a few seconds. Before Richard could say more, Dr. Whitmore approached with Ethan's chart. Eleanor, having overheard the earlier conversation in the hallway, immediately turned to the doctor. "Doctor, I want to know everything about this boy's condition. Sarah's son. Right now." "Doctor." Whitmore glanced at Sarah for permission, then laid out Ethan's congenital heart condition and the $120,000 transfer to Columbus. Eleanor turned to her son, her eyes resolute. "Richard, get this child to the best cardiac hospital you know. Use the private jet if you have to. The company covers every cent." "Yes, Mother." Richard nodded instantly, without a moment's hesitation. Which only confused Sarah more, since she'd never seen a $100,000 decision made that fast. Sarah waved her hands frantically. No, I can't accept this. I don't even know your family. I can't let you. You saved me from the rain and from being humiliated this afternoon." Eleanor gripped Sarah's hand tightly. "Now let me save your son. Don't turn down an old woman." Sarah's tears wouldn't stop. She couldn't find the words for anything beyond a broken thank you. But amid that emotional moment, someone stood watching from a distance through the hallway window. A young woman in a gray suit, phone in hand, eyes narrowed with calculation. Her name was Victoria Lane, Richard Halloway's personal assistant and future fiancée. And she had just witnessed something that threatened to unravel a plan she'd been building in secret for 2 years. Victoria stepped into a private hospital conference room, shut the door, and called someone. "We have a problem," she said, her voice ice cold. "Eleanor just showed up in public, completely lucid, and now she's talking about handing over assets to some nobody waitress? If she's this sharp, the board will never approve our incapacity proposal." On the other end was Marcus Bell, Chief Financial Officer of Halloway Industries, and Victoria's secret partner in a scheme to seize control of the company. For 2 years, Marcus and Victoria had been quietly building a case, doctoring medical records, bribing a psychiatrist to testify that Eleanor showed signs of cognitive decline, all to petition the court to declare her legally incompetent. If it worked, her 35% stake in the company, enough to control every major decision, would transfer to a legal guardian. And that guardian, of course, would be Richard, who Victoria believed she could fully control once she became his wife. "Why did she suddenly leave the house alone?" Marcus asked, irritated. "I don't know," Victoria said, "but I suspect she's onto something. Maybe she's suspected us for a while, and this whole disguise was some kind of test. See who treats her kindly, who doesn't. Some sort of trial run before she rewrites her will." A long pause. Then Marcus said, "If that's true, we need to move before she signs anything new. The emergency board meeting is already scheduled for Monday morning to vote on the guardianship proposal. We've got 3 days." "Fine." Victoria glanced through the window toward Sarah sitting by Ethan's bed. "As for the waitress, I'll handle her. If I have to, I'll make her disappear from this picture entirely." 3 days later, Ethan came through surgery successfully at the Columbus Children's Cardiac Center. 6 hours on the table, but the outcome was good. Doctors confirmed he'd make a full recovery. During that time, Sarah and Eleanor grew unusually close. Eleanor visited the hospital often, bringing books for Ethan, telling him fairy tales, even teaching him to play chess. The same game she'd learned from her late husband, the founder of Halloway Industries, who had passed away 8 years earlier. One afternoon, when it was just the two of them, Eleanor confided something she'd never told anyone, not even her own son. "You know, Sarah, I'm 72 years old, and over the past 2 years, I stopped being sure who actually loved me and who was just waiting for me to die so they could split what's left. That day, I wore old clothes on purpose, walked in the rain without a single assistant or bodyguard. Not because I was losing my mind, but because I wanted, just once, to see the real world around me, not the version money creates." Sarah listened in silence, understanding pieces of a bigger picture. "And you," Eleanor squeezed her hand, "are the only person in 2 years who treated me with kindness without knowing who I was." But right in the middle of that warm moment, Eleanor's phone rang. It was her personal attorney, his voice urgent. "Mrs. Halloway, I just received notice. There's an emergency board meeting called for Monday morning regarding your legal competency." Eleanor's face went pale. "Who proposed this meeting?" A short silence before the answer came. And it was the twist that stopped both Sarah and the listener cold. "It's Miss Victoria Lane, ma'am, with written support from Mr. Marcus Bell." Eleanor sat frozen in her chair, her hand trembling around the phone. Sarah saw her expression change and asked, worried, "What's wrong?" "Someone wants to prove I've lost my mind," Eleanor said, her voice a mix of pain and fury, so they can take control of my shares in the company. That night, Richard was called in urgently. When he heard the news, he couldn't believe it. Victoria couldn't have, Richard stammered, his face draining of color like he'd just been slapped. We're about to get engaged. She said she was doing this out of concern for Mom's health. You trust her more than you trust your own mother? Eleanor asked, her voice breaking. Richard fell silent, his face twisted with conflict. This clearly wasn't the first time he'd had doubts about Victoria, but he'd always talked himself out of it, telling himself he was overthinking. Sarah, standing off to the side, quietly tried to step out and give the family privacy, but Eleanor stopped her. Sarah, stay. You're the only outsider I trust right now. That night, Eleanor called her attorney and demanded a full investigation into every piece of evidence Victoria and Marcus were using. Within 24 hours, the truth started unraveling. The psychiatrist who signed off on Eleanor's cognitive decline assessment had never actually met her. The signature had been forged using AI-generated voice and handwriting synthesis, a sophisticated scheme that took forensic investigators hours to uncover. Leaked internal emails also showed Marcus Bell had transferred $5 million into an offshore account under Victoria Lane's name over the past 6 months, labeled as a consulting fee for the takeover plan. Saturday afternoon, Richard confronted Victoria directly in his office. Sarah, at Eleanor's request, was there alongside the family attorney as an independent witness, someone who had personally seen Eleanor's clarity and sharpness firsthand, every decision she'd made from the moment she walked into that diner to everything that followed. Tell me the truth, Victoria, Richard said, his voice trembling with restrained anger. Did you conspire with Marcus to seize control of my mother's shares? Victoria stood tall, unshaken, a cold composure that chilled the whole room. I did it for the company, Richard. Your mother is 72. She's not sharp enough anymore to run a $12 billion empire. I was protecting our future, protecting the tens of thousands of employees who depend on this company's stability. Protecting it by forging a doctor's signature? By funneling $5 million into your own account? Richard slammed the investigation file down on the desk, his voice sharp. Victoria froze, panic flashing across her face for the first time. Who told you that? Eleanor walked in through the side door, standing beside Sarah, her voice carrying an authority that no longer resembled the frail old woman from the rain. This was the image of the businesswoman who had built an empire from nothing alongside her husband. You heard it from me, Victoria, and as of this moment, you're no longer part of this family or part of Halloway Industries. Monday morning, the Halloway Industries boardroom was packed. 12 board members, legal teams from both sides, and financial journalists invited in after word of the scandal had started leaking to the press. Eleanor Halloway walked in wearing a sharp navy blue suit, hair perfectly styled, her stride steady and confident. A world apart from the soaked, frightened old woman from 10 days earlier. The room fell silent as she began to speak. Members of the board, I understand there's a proposal on the table to evaluate my legal competency. I'd like to demonstrate my clarity of mind by telling you a story. She recounted the entire 10-day journey. From her decision to disguise herself as a poor woman to test people's character, to meeting Sarah at the Millbrook Diner, to the exposed scheme involving Victoria Lane and Marcus Bell. I'd like to invite Ms. Sarah Mitchell, the one person throughout this entire journey who had no idea who I was, yet treated me with complete, unconditional kindness. To speak to this board? Sarah, in the simplest outfit she owned, stepped forward, her heart pounding. She'd never stood in front of this kind of power before in her life. I don't know much about law or finance, Sarah said, her voice shaking but clear. All I know is that for 10 days, Mrs. Halloway was the most lucid, thoughtful, and kind woman I've ever met. She remembered the name of every doctor and nurse taking care of my son. She personally read every line of our insurance paperwork to make sure there wasn't a single clause working against my family. A person like that cannot possibly be someone who's lost their competency. The room broke into applause. After the attorney's presentation, complete with evidence of the forged signature and the offshore money trail, the board voted unanimously to reject the guardianship proposal entirely. Marcus Bell was fired on the spot and now faces criminal fraud charges. Victoria Lane was permanently banned from any involvement with the company and now faces a civil lawsuit for medical record forgery. Richard stood up, looking at Sarah with a gratitude too big for words. A month later, Ethan had fully recovered from surgery, running around as healthy as any other kid his age. Sarah went back to work at the Copper Cup, but this time in a new role, branch manager, after Eleanor quietly bought out the small coffee chain and promoted Sarah. Not out of pity, but because Eleanor recognized something rare in her: kindness with no strings attached, paired with the courage to stand up for what's right. Karen Whitfield, the former manager, was let go after multiple complaints surfaced from customers and coworkers alike. Turns out, Sarah wasn't the only one who'd witnessed how poorly Karen treated people. But here's the part nobody, not even Sarah, ever saw coming. 3 months after the board meeting, Eleanor invited Sarah to the Halloway family estate for dinner. Partway through the meal, she handed Sarah a thick envelope. "What is this?" Sarah asked, her hand trembling slightly. "Open it." Inside were the founding documents for a scholarship fund called the Last Cup Foundation, dedicated to children from working-class families battling congenital heart conditions, permanently funded by Halloway Industries. And listed as co-founder alongside Eleanor was none other than Sarah Mitchell. Sarah burst into tears, unable to speak. But Eleanor wasn't finished. She handed over one more document: a transfer agreement for 3% of Halloway Industries stock, worth nearly $360 million, in Sarah's name, with one condition: the shares couldn't be sold for 10 years, and the annual dividends had to go towards sustaining and expanding the scholarship fund. "You didn't have to do this," Sarah said, choking back tears. "I helped you without expecting anything back." "That's exactly why," Eleanor smiled, her eyes warm with the light of someone who had rediscovered her faith in people. "You're the one who deserves it. I have enough money to buy almost anything in this world, Sarah, except a genuine heart. And you reminded me that they still exist." The story could have ended right there. But if you think this is simply a modern fairy tale about good people getting rewarded, you're missing the most important detail. 6 months later, in a rare interview with Forbes, when asked why she'd decided to test people's character by disguising herself as a poor old woman, Eleanor Halloway revealed something that stunned the entire American media. This wasn't the first time she'd done this. For 20 years, ever since her husband, The company's founder passed away. Roughly every 3 years, Eleanor had quietly disguised herself as a stranger down on her luck, traveled to a random town, and searched for genuinely good people. People she would later quietly support, fund, or offer life-changing opportunities to, without ever revealing her true identity unless it became absolutely necessary. Sarah Mitchell was the seventh. And in that studio, when the reporter asked how long she planned to keep running these experiments, Eleanor just smiled, looked straight into the camera, and said, "For as long as I still believe that in a world full of indifference, there are still people willing to stand up for a stranger, without needing to know what they'll get in return." Sarah Mitchell and Eleanor Halloway's story leaves us with 3 lessons worth remembering. First, real kindness is never measured by whether the person receiving it can pay it back. Sarah defended Eleanor with no idea who she was, expecting absolutely nothing in return. And that's exactly what made it matter. Second, never judge a person by what they're wearing. Worn-out clothes and mud-caked shoes don't say anything about a person's true worth. Sometimes the person everyone else dismisses is the one with the power to change your entire life. Third, justice and kindness, no matter how buried or delayed, always find their way back to where they belong. People like Victoria and Marcus, who exploit trust for personal gain, eventually pay the price. If you're a person who was in Sarah's shoes that day, would you have had the courage to stand up for a stranger, even knowing you might lose the job supporting your entire family? Thanks for staying until the very end.